Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Ramirez Magana, and for today's presentation, I will be presenting Fate of Lactate. An overview of what this presentation is going to hold is pathway of the Cori cycle, effects of physical activity on the pathway, lactate versus lactic acid, the metabolic use of lactate, and the effects of accumulation on the body. So what is lactate? Lactate is an organic molecule that is produced when the body is converting food into energy. The highest production of lactate comes from muscle. Later on, it can be used as an energy source, which I will be kind of going into a little bit, and is also an indication of certain respiratory conditions. So let's move on into the Cori cycle and how it works. So basically what the Cori cycle is, the Cori cycle retrieves the lactate from the active muscle that is being used during the exercise because the muscles obviously are producing this lactate muscle. It is then converted into glycogen to replenish the low levels that we are obtaining, because when we are exercising, we are typically using our glycogen to convert into energy source, and we then get the glucose to go into the muscle, and then pyruvate combines with the non-oxidated hydrogen ions that later on form into lactate. Lactate is then transported through the bloodstream into the liver and is broken down again into glucose, and then the glucose retrieves back to the muscle, creating an ongoing cycle to keep producing lactate for the body. Now let's move on to the next. So now we are going to talk about how exercise intensity and training adaptations affects the pathway. Lactate accumulates rapidly during high intensity. Untrained individuals start to accumulate this lactate threshold around 50% of their aerobic capacity compared to trained individuals. They start accumulating this lactate threshold at a later percentage. When there is an oversupply of lactate during exercise that is not being used, our body's oxygen levels drop, resulting into stopping the workout, meaning that trained individuals can last longer while exercising when comparing them to untrained individuals, simply because of the fact of the VO2 max in trained individuals is a lot higher than it is on untrained individuals, or what I would call sedentary lifestyle. We are now going to move into the differences between lactate acid versus lactate. A lot of people think it's the same thing, but it's most definitely not the same thing. The main thing that separates them is that lactate acid has 6 hydrogen ions, whereas lactate only has 5. Therefore, lactic acid has a potential of giving to another molecule. Lactate acid is an organic compound, whereas lactate is a dissociation lactic acid lactate acid is formed during anaerobic glycolysis, and lactate can build up in the individual to high levels, It is a product of glucose metabolism. So basically, simply, the biggest thing is that lactate acid basically creates lactate, but lactate is used as a form of energy. Now, the metabolic use of lactate. We use lactate during high-intensity workouts, as mentioned prior. Lactate is then converted into pyruvate, which is converted to acetyl-CoA. It enters the citric acid cycle, which creates energy during aerobic exercise. So basically, some lactate isn't used for this, but some like how I mentioned earlier, lactate is potentially used as energy, and this is kind of an explanation as to why it's used as energy or how it can be used as energy. But yeah, so now to move on to lactate accumulation. It is accumulated during high intensity exercise. Lactate is being produced at higher rates than the body is using during this exercise, meaning that the lactate levels are way higher than the body needs them to be. Ultimately, too much unused lactate causes low oxygen levels, which results in decreasing or stopping the exercise completely. So lactate is a good thing when it's being used, but when it's being accumulated, it prevents the person from oxygen, causing hypoxia, which can later on result into more detrimental consequences. Factors that influence exercise cessation. So basically, anything that's sedentary lifestyle. So if your body is not used to exercising, usually when you start an exercise program, you usually start slowly. You don't go into the high intensity because it's just a shock to your body as well. When it comes to your heart rate, when it comes to your respiratory rate, you kind of have to slow it in. So that could be an influence in exercise cessation with lactate, because your body is going to overproduce very quickly and your body doesn't know what to do with it. Cardiovascular disease. Some people that do have certain cardiovascular disease aren't able to exercise at that high intensity. So therefore, they're kind of confined into low, moderate intensity. Respiratory disease. If you're not able to keep up with your VO2 max, it can also affect how much lactate is being produced or overproduced, and therefore cause you to your exercise to end. Other things that usually help affect exercise in general, or any health condition in general, that probably is put more emphasis into anything, is substance abuse and smoking, whether it be alcohol, marijuana, other intensive opioids. Any of those kind of mess with your respiratory, cardiovascular systems, ultimately causing you to not being able to keep up with exercise, and in the long term affects you in various detrimental ways. So references that I used for this PowerPoint was the effect of lactate accumulation during exercise-induced muscle fatigue on sensomotor cortex, the difference between lactate and lactic acid, and our textbook, the Exercise Physiology, Nutrition, Energy, and Human Performance textbook. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation.